Por lo tanto, vamos a empezar de lleno. Por cierto, va a ser un día, insisto en lo de espectacular. Veo a Lauri, que está aquí de ayer, que hizo una ponencia maravillosa. Lo primero que hice a casa es buscar blockchain. Y estuve mucho rato. Luego, si quieres, conversamos, pero es duro. El blockchain es duro. Creo que todos coincidimos en que en pleno siglo XXI, con la Agenda 2030 de Naciones Unidas y esos 17 Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible en vigor, el respeto activo al medio ambiente, a la sostenibilidad y, sobre todo, ya lo que nos trae hoy aquí, a la innovación en ese terreno, son al mismo tiempo una responsabilidad empresarial y también una oportunidad. En ello es especialista Robert Kennedy Jr., abogado, escritor, activista ambiental, presidente de Waterkeeper Alliance, la organización sin ánimo de lucro más grande globalmente dedicada en exclusiva a desarrollar y generar, y además de proporcionar soluciones para poder dotar de agua limpia a la población mundial. Eso suena y es maravilloso. La revista Times lo consideró como uno de los héroes del planeta, the hero. Robert. De hecho, es un convencido de la innovación. Ayer le leí una frase suya en la que insistía en que velar por la economía y el medio ambiente a la vez es posible y además en todas las situaciones. Hoy está con nosotros para hablar de innovación aplicada al desarrollo sostenible y es un honor y un placer poder darle la bienvenida a este escenario.
Gracias. Y gracias a Gerardo y José Luis y a mi amigo Juan Verde y la Cámara Comercio de Granada de España y en Chile. Y no te preocupes, no voy a hablar en español. He olvidado todo de mi español, tengo que practicarlo. Y entonces hoy voy a hablar en inglés. Good morning. I began my work as an environmental advocate, as a lawyer suing polluters on behalf of commercial fishermen. And we grew the organization, so it's now the largest water protection organization in the world. We are in 44 countries. We have 350 patrol boats that patrol local waterways, and we bring litigation against polluters. I'm still involved in litigation, and litigation can be a revolutionary vessel for social change. And, for example, I represent 14,000 people in the United States who got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma by handling Roundup, which is the most popular pesticide and herbicide in the world, made by Monsanto. And a year and a half ago, we brought the first case to court. We won $289 million for one client. 6 months later, we brought the second case and won $81 million. The third case we tried last spring, and we won $2 billion for two clients, a man and his wife, who both got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The price of Bayer stock has dropped in half. And Bayer, which owns Monsanto, now has to reconsider the entire business of herbicide application globally. We have, as I said, 14,000 more cases to try. Martin Luther King said that the tools of advocacy are litigation, legislation, agitation, and education. And litigation has been my primary tool for most of my career. But about 12 years ago, I recognized that there was probably an even more revolutionary vessel for achieving social change. which was innovation. We have today technologies that can solve most of our most critical environmental problems. And the big challenge is capitalizing them and getting them to markets. I joined as a partner the biggest venture capital firm for green technology in the world. It's called Vantage Point. We were the biggest investor and the first investor for Tesla. We built my companies built the two biggest solar plants in North America, a concentrated solar plant in California, and a PV solar plant in Canada. And we've also built transmission and many other forms of energy production. One of the things that I learned from working for the commercial fishermen is that we're not protecting the environment so much for the sake of the fishes and the birds. We're protecting it for our own sake, because we recognize that nature is the infrastructure of our communities. And if we want to meet our obligation as a generation, as a civilization, as a nation, which is to create communities for our children and provide them with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities that our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, the assets that cannot be reduced to private property ownership, but by their nature are part of the community, the property of the community, what we call the commons, or the public trust asset, the rivers and shorelines and landscapes that connect us to our past, to our history, that provide context to our communities, and that are the source, ultimately, of our values, our virtues, our character as a people. Now, one of the things that you'll hear from the big polluters and their indentured servants in our political process is that we have to choose between economic prosperity on the one hand and environmental protection on the other. And that is a false choice. In 100% of the situations, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generations, over the long term, and how it preserves the values of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what Donald Trump and Exxon and the Koch brothers want us to do, which is to treat our planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy. And we can make a few people billionaires by impoverishing the rest of us. But our children are going to pay for our joyride. And they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they will never be able to pay. Environmental injury is deficit spending. It's a way of loading the cost of our generation's prosperity onto the backs of our children. And we don't have to live this way. We have other choices. We can live lives of prosperity and dignity and do it in a way that is moral and sustainable. In 2008, Lord David Putnam gave a speech before Parliament, and Parliament was debating a cap-and-trade system that was designed to impose free market discipline onto the disposal of carbon into our atmosphere. I'm going to tell you this. People have said to me for 35 years, what's the best thing we can do to protect the environment? I give them an answer that people generally don't expect from environmental activists. I say the best thing for the environment is free market capitalism, true free market capitalism, which we do not have in the United States. We have corporate crony capitalism. In a true free market promotes efficiency. And efficiency means the elimination of waste. And pollution is waste. A true free market would require us to properly value our natural resources. And it is the undervaluation of those resources that causes us to use them wastefully. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. What polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I will show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his cost of production. That's what all pollution is. In a true free market economy, actors in the market have to pay all of the cost of bringing their product to market. That includes the cost of cleaning up your mess, which was a lesson we were all supposed to have learned in kindergarten. What polluters do is they figure out ways to cause the public to shift the burdens of those costs onto the backs of the public. And when they do that, they are cheating the free market. And none of us gets the advantages of the efficiencies of prosperity and the democracy that free market capitalism otherwise offers to our country. Now, Lord David Putnam, when Parliament was debating this market-oriented approach to reducing carbon, everybody in England understands that global warming is real. And they understand that we have to do something. It's an urgency that we have to address. But even this reasonable imposition of free market rules upon the disposal of carbon got people nervous. As people vested interests in other people said, we can't move precipitously. We have to move incrementally. Because if we move too suddenly, it's going to cause grave dislocations in the market and lots of pain. And Lord Putnam reminded Parliament that exactly 200 years before, the same body had debated the abolition of the slave trade. And everybody in England at that time was against slavery. They saw it as a moral cataclysm for the British Empire. They were frightened because it was 25% of the GNP of Great Britain. And it was the principal source of energy for the entire British Empire, free human labor. And they said, we have to move slowly. But after a year of debate, Parliament made the moral choice and abolished slavery overnight. And instead of collapsing, the British economy exploded as thousands of entrepreneurs rushed into that space to create new forms of energy, mainly mechanical ones, in an era that we now know as the Industrial Revolution, which was the greatest epic in wealth creation in the history of mankind. And the abolition of the slave trade exposed all of these hidden inefficiencies that were associated with free human bondage. Now today, we don't need to abolish carbon. to understand that our deadly addiction to it is the principal drag on American capitalism and capitalism globally. According to the International Monetary Fund, today we pay globally in subsidies $5.2 trillion annually to the carbon industry, to oil and coal and natural gas. $5.2 trillion. The United States, $629 billion annually. Our defense budget in the United States is $550 billion. So we are giving more free money to the carbon billionaires than we pay for our military. We give more subsidies to carbon in the United States 10 times the amount that we pay for education. So, and that doesn't even include some of the hidden costs that the IMF didn't capture in that analysis. For example, I spent many years suing the coal industry in the state of West Virginia. 3 years ago, I was in West Virginia arguing a case in the Supreme Court of that case, of that state. A jury verdict that I got, the highest verdict in the history of the state. When we were driving back to the airport, we were driving on a road that was like a skateboard park. It was completely smooth, like velvet. This is very unusual in West Virginia. West Virginia, although it is the richest state by the amount of carbon it has of coal, it has the poorest people in the United States. This is an irony. If you live in a place that's got a lot of carbon wealth, you will see a lot of poverty and a lot of tyranny. That's what you see in West Virginia. So most of the roads in West Virginia have potholes in them. They're not good. I said to the driver, "Why does this road feel so smooth?" He said it has 22 inches of asphalt. Well, the New York Turnpike has 4 inches. That's all you need. I knew why they need 22 inches in West Virginia, because the coal trucks weigh 90,000 pounds. And if they drive on a 4-inch highway, they will pulverize it. So the taxpayers are paying for 22 inches. That's millions of dollars per lane, per mile. It's coming out of our taxes for transportation. But really, that's a subsidy to the coal industry. And the coal will say, well, we only charge 10 cents a kilowatt hour, but they're not telling you that from your other pocket, you're paying for 6,000 miles of highway with 22 inches of asphalt on them. Now, in West Virginia, they have flattened an area of the Appalachian Mountains larger than the state of Delaware, a huge area. The 500 biggest mountains in the state have been cut down flat. What is the cost of that? They took the overburden from those fills and they dumped it into rivers. And they buried 1,200 miles of rivers in that state. They have contaminated another 2,500. The water supplies for Charleston and Morgantown are too poisonous to drink. What is the cost of that? That's part of the cost of coal. 10 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences found that every freshwater fish in America has dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. So, I have 7 children. My father took me fishing all the time when I was a kid, and we ate the fish. But today in the United States, we live in a science fiction nightmare where my children and the children of every other American can now no longer engage in the seminal primal activity of American youth, which is to go fishing with their father and mother in the local fishing hole and then come home and safely eat the fish. Because a coal company gave money to a politician. I take my kids camping in the Adirondack Mountains, the oldest protected wilderness on Earth. 20% of the lakes in the Adirondacks are sterilized from acid rain that's coming from coal plants. All of the lakes on the high peaks of the Appalachian Mountains from Georgia to northern Quebec, 1,300 miles of lakes sterilized from acid rain. That's part of the cost of coal. So, and you can go on and on. These are the railroads. You know, I was on a very beautiful high-speed rail coming from Madrid yesterday. Do you know why we don't have those in the United States? Because the rails are warped because of the weight of the coal cars. Half the traffic on our railroads are coal gondolas, and they destroy the rails, so we can't have high-speed rail in the country. That's one of the costs of our reliance on coal. Oh, and you can go on. We have, according to the CDC, we spend $355 billion a year treating lung damage, any injuries and sicknesses that are caused by breathing ozone and particulates from coal-burning power plants. There's thousands of miles of aquifer in our country that's poisoned by coal ash from coal-burning utilities. And these are all parts of the cost of carbon, and we don't recognize when we buy that fuel for 10 cents a kilowatt hour. What about oil? When until recently, we were borrowing $1 billion a day from the Chinese to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Not only that, we spend $250 billion a year when there's no war with armed services protecting the oil fields in the Gulf. And then we have to drill a hole in the ground, bring up the oil, refine it expensively, genuflect to the sheiks who despise democracy, who are hated by their own people, who won't let women drive an automobile, who take their political enemies, American journalists, and cut them up with bone saws, and get into a war. The last war that we got in, an oil war, cost us $4.3 trillion. That's the cost of our oil. And then they bring the oil with a military escort to the United States, and we pay for it, not Exxon. They spill it all over the Gulf. They spill it all over Valdez, and they burn the oil and make everybody sick. Oh, if we were paying the true cost of oil, we'd be paying $15 a gallon for gasoline, and nobody would be buying it. Everybody would be driving around in an electric car. So, those subsidies are the only thing that allow carbon to continue to dominate our markets. That industry, if they had to pay their costs, in a true free market, could not survive one day. Now, I'm going to tell you something. How do we make that transition to clean energy? Amory Lovin showed me two photos. One photo of New York City, 38th Street, looking north on 5th Avenue, taken in 1903. There were 300 horse and buggy carriages and one Model T automobile. 10 years later, in 1913, the same picture from the same vantage point showed 300 Model T automobiles and one horse and buggy. Why did that happen? It happened because over a 10-year period, Henry Ford figured out how to drop the price of Model Ts by 67%. Well, guess what? In the last 5 years, the cost of solar has come down to 80%. And in the 5 years before that, it came down another 80%. So last year, 63% of the new generation built on the planet was solar and wind, renewable energy. Not because of subsidies, not because people were making moral choices, but because the economic reality and renewables are today much cheaper. Before I came down, I'll give you another example. I debated a guy a couple of years ago from the oil industry. He said no coal plant in history has ever been replaced by a solar plant. 6 weeks ago, the heads of the CEO of Xcel, which is the only utility in Colorado, announced he was closing all the coal-burning power plants in the state and replacing them with solar and wind because it's cheaper to build a new solar and wind facility in Colorado than it is to continue operating an existing coal plant. India just announced the cancellation of 14 gigawatts of coal-burning power plants. That's more than the entire coal fleet in the United Kingdom, in England. 5 years ago, nobody would have believed that. It's because the cost is plummeting. We have now, in the past 5 years, closed 260 coal plants in the United States. 5 years ago, we had 1,100 coal plants. 260 of those are now gone. Nobody will ever build another coal plant in the United States. Not because morality, not because of the environment, but because of the cost. And so the question is, how do we transition completely and decarbonize our societies? And the answer to that is free market capitalism. Force the carbon industry to pay the true cost of bringing its product to market. We need markets. The only reason that the coal and oil companies continue to dominate our marketplace is because they have political power, they own the politicians. One family, the Koch brothers, at the last election, the Democratic Party spent $1 billion. This is during when Trump ran. The Republican Party spent $1 billion. The Koch brothers, the biggest privately owned oil company in America, spent $1 billion. We know in the United States, if you look at data, that in almost 90% of the elections over the past 2 decades, the candidate with the most money won the election. So you can buy democracy. And that's what this industry has done, and that's what they have to do in order to survive. And what we need are markets. Markets that do what a market is supposed to do, which is to reward good behavior, which is efficiency, and to punish bad behavior, which is inefficiency and waste. Right now in the United States, we have markets that are governed by rules that were written by the polluters to reward the dirtiest, filthiest, most poisonous, most destructive, most warmongering fuels from hell, rather than the cheap, clean, green, wholesome, and patriotic fuels from heaven. And we need to change that system by opening markets. And free market capitalism is the most powerful economic engine ever created. And it has to be harnessed to a social purpose. Otherwise, it will drag us down the lane of plutocracy and environmental cataclysm and apocalypse. And the way to harness it to a social purpose is to actually make it function by forcing all the actors in the marketplace to pay the true cost of bringing their product to market. In the state of Texas, it is easier to build a pipeline, less regulatory impediments, than it is to put a solar panel on your roof. because the oil industry owns the state legislature, and they are trying to prevent solar from entering the marketplace. We built in the United States, in the last 12 years, 16,000 miles of pipeline. We built only 600 miles of transmission, because that's the vehicle for wind and solar. And the strategy of the oil and coal industries in our country are to put huge investments into infrastructure, and when they do that, when they build a pipeline like the XL pipeline, it's not just Exxon that's paying for it. It's Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo and Morgan Guaranty, and it's the teacher's pension fund and the fireman's pension fund. And now you have all of these power centers of the society that are invested in making sure that that gas line has gas flowing through it for the next 20 years so that they can recollect on their investment. And they are trying to wrap our country in shackles of pipelines and infrastructure, because that's their strategy for maintaining the dominance for a fuel that makes no economic sense. Oh, this is a war. And it's a war between the carbon incumbents, which are a highly capitalized industry that employs relatively very small numbers of people, that makes a few people billionaires by impoverishing other people, that creates autocratic systems. You know, the political system of a country reflects its economic organization. And if you have major industries like the energy industry that are controlled by a tiny number of companies and individuals, your political system will also become undemocratic. That's why when you look around the world, the countries with the most oil are the most tyrannical. When you look in the United States, the states with the oil have the lowest education, the worst health care, the worst distribution of income, and all of their other criteria for measuring social happiness are at the bottom. It's called the resource curse. And what we need to do is figure out how to transition to a democratic, a system that turns every American into an energy entrepreneur. My home in Mount Kisco, New York, is a power plant. I have a state-of-the-art geothermal, and I have state-of-the-art solar on its roof. Almost every day of the year, it's producing more energy than it makes, than it uses. When I'm away in the summer, it's just a power plant. Why can't I sell that energy to my utility and get the same amount of money that Con Edison gets? You can't do it in any state in the United States. What we need are systems of a true free market that turns every individual in Europe and the United States into an energy entrepreneur, every home into a power plant, and powers our country based upon initiative and ambition and human resources rather than foreign oil or dirty coal. And we can do that, and when we do it, it will not only democratize our energy system, it will democratize our nations as well. I think I'm getting the signal to sit down. I want to thank all of you for listening to me, for being here, and for giving me the opportunity to talk. Thank you very much.